You've probably heard of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Most people have. It's one of those famous biblical mysteries. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel just gone, vanished from history. There are still theories today about where they ended up. Some people think they went to Ethiopia or India or even the British Isles. But here's the thing. The mechanism behind it is not a mystery. We know exactly what happened. And when you understand what Assyria did, not just to Israel, but to every nation it conquered, the lost tribes stop being a puzzle and become one of the most chilling stories in the ancient world. Welcome back to OT in Context. I'm Scott Smith. In this series, we've been building the framework you need to understand the Old Testament in its historical and geographical context. We've looked at how nations worked in the ancient world. Sumer, where civilization began, the Akkadian Empire, Egypt, the Hittites. Today, we get to Assyria. And if there is one empire in the Old Testament that defined what it meant to live under the shadow of dread, it's this one. To understand Assyria, you need to start with a city. About 100 miles south of modern Mosul, on the western bank of the Tigris River, sat a city called Ashur. Named after the Assyrian national deity, also called Ashur, this city would become the original heart of one of the most powerful empires the ancient world had seen. Ashur wasn't founded on conquest, not at first. It was a commercial hub, a trading center that grew wealthy, connecting Mesopotamian merchants with the markets of Anatolia. The Assyrians had extensive trade networks across the ancient Near East, and that commercial wealth became the foundation of something much larger. By around 2000 BC, the region around Ashur had become a recognizable kingdom, what historians call the Old Assyrian period. This overlaps roughly with the age of Abraham and Isaac. Then came the Middle Assyrian period, from about 1400 to 1000 BC, roughly the time of the Judges, and Assyria was quietly growing. Then, around 911 BC, something changed. The Neo-Assyrian Empire emerged, and over the next 2 centuries, it became one of the largest territorial empires the ancient world had yet seen. Stretching from the Mediterranean coast deep into Mesopotamia, covering portions of Egypt, the Arabian Desert, the Armenian highlands, and Anatolia. For most of the period covered by the books of Kings and the major prophets, Isaiah, Hosea, Amos, Micah, Assyria was the dominant world power. Now, lots of empires in the ancient world conquered their neighbors. What made Assyria especially terrifying was not just its military capacity, but the scale and system of what it did after conquest. First, the military. The Assyrians deployed iron weapons and siege technology at a scale their enemies struggled to match. They built assault ramps, battering rams, and undermining tunnels against fortified cities at a time when most defenders assumed their walls were sufficient. They didn't wait out strong cities for months. They dismantled them. We have extraordinary evidence of this. Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh contained a whole room of stone reliefs, massive carved panels depicting the Assyrian siege of Lachish in extraordinary detail. You can see the ramps being constructed, the battering rams advancing, prisoners and captives subjected to brutal treatment. These were not documentary records. These were propaganda, designed to show the ancient world what happened to people who resisted. Those reliefs are now in the British Museum. Second, psychological warfare. Sennacherib's officials didn't just bring an army to Jerusalem. They brought a speech. In 2 Kings 18, Assyrian envoys stood at the city wall and shouted to the defenders in Hebrew. In Hebrew, so the people inside could hear, listing the nations Assyria had already destroyed and asking, "What makes you think your God will be any different?" Assyria weaponized its own reputation as deliberately as it built siege ramps. But here's what you need to understand about Assyria's strategy and the thing that explains the 10 lost tribes. When Assyria conquered a nation, its goal was not just military victory. It wasn't even tribute, though they demanded that too. Their goal was durable control, break resistance, disrupt local power structures that could organize revolt, and fold conquered peoples into the empire permanently. And here's how they pursued that goal. After defeating a nation, Assyria would deport large portions of the population, the leadership, the skilled workers, the military class, and scatter them across other parts of the empire. Then they would bring peoples from other conquered regions and resettle them in that emptied territory. You take the people away from their land. You bring strangers to fill it. The result, deliberately engineered, is a population that can no longer easily organize around a shared identity, a shared memory, or a shared claim to a homeland. They weren't just defeating nations. They were making it structurally difficult for those nations to ever come back. This is what happened to the northern kingdom of Israel. It took 3 Assyrian kings to finish it. Tiglath-Pileser III carved away large portions of Israel's territory in earlier campaigns. Shalmaneser V besieged Samaria. And then Sargon II, early in his reign, claimed its capture and resettlement. Sargon's own annals record the deportation of 27,290 Israelites. Many Israelites were deported across the empire. Peoples from other conquered regions were resettled into the land, producing the mixed population the biblical text later describes in 2 Kings 17. That is how the 10 tribes of Israel were lost. Not through mystery, through a documented, systematic policy carried out by 3 successive Assyrian kings. Now here's the critical thing the biblical text adds, because this is not just a geopolitical story. 2 Kings 17 doesn't explain Israel's fall mainly as an Assyrian achievement. It explains it as the judgment of God. Israel had pursued the gods of the surrounding nations, broken the covenant, and ignored prophet after prophet. Assyria was the instrument of judgment, but the cause, the real cause, was Israel's own faithlessness before God. Biblically, Israel did not fall simply because Assyria was strong. Israel fell under the covenant judgment of God, and Assyria was the instrument that he used. And that distinction matters enormously. Which brings us to Judah. If Israel fell, why didn't Judah? In 701, Sennacherib launched a campaign through the Levant. He systematically dismantled Judah's fortified cities. He besieged Lachish, Judah's second most important city. And those reliefs we mentioned show what happened there. He wrote in his own annals that he shut Hezekiah in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. And then he went home without taking the city. Sennacherib's records confirm the campaign, confirm his siege of Jerusalem, confirm Hezekiah's tribute, but they never claim the capture of Jerusalem. An Assyrian king who documented everything he conquered never claimed this one. The biblical text explains why. 2 Kings 19 records that the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night, and Sennacherib withdrew. We can't verify that number through archaeology, but we can verify that the most powerful king in the world left Jerusalem standing and said nothing about why. Isaiah had told Hezekiah it would happen. He will not come into the city or shoot an arrow there. And he didn't. But notice, Judah didn't survive because Hezekiah was strong, or because Jerusalem's walls were better than Lachish's. In 2 Kings 19, God himself says that he will defend the city for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. Judah survived because the Lord kept his word. Here's something worth sitting with. Assyria was brutal, systematic in its cruelty, an empire that built its power on the deliberate dismantling of other peoples. And yet, Isaiah describes Assyria as an instrument in God's hand. Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger. But Isaiah doesn't stop there. The same passage turns immediately against Assyria itself, because Assyria does not so intend, and its heart does not so think. Assyria boasts in its own strength. It pursues conquest for its own glory. And for that pride and cruelty, God will judge Assyria too. The Old Testament gives us a sharp picture here. Assyria is truly wicked, and God truly governs it and uses it for his purposes. Both things are fully true at the same time. Then there's Jonah. God sends his prophet not to Israel, but to Nineveh, to the capital of the empire that would devastate the northern kingdom. And Nineveh repents. The city at the heart of the most feared empire in the ancient world hears the word of God through a reluctant Hebrew prophet and turns. Jonah shows us that God is willing to show mercy even to Israel's most terrifying enemies. Nahum, written decades later, shows us that God's mercy does not cancel his justice. Nineveh returned to its violence and arrogance, and Nahum announced its coming destruction in vivid detail. The God of the Old Testament is never tribal and never tame. Nineveh fell in 612 BC. The city was destroyed by a coalition of Babylonians and Medes, quickly and completely. Assyria staggered on for a few more years before the empire was effectively finished by 609 BC. Nahum had seen it coming. Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? The answer for the nations Assyria had scattered? No one. So, the next time you hear about the 10 lost tribes and someone offers you a theory about Ethiopia or Britain or the Americas, you can explain what we actually know. The mechanism is not a mystery. 3 Assyrian kings carried out a documented policy of deportation and resettlement that shattered the northern kingdom as a political and ethnic entity and scattered its population across an empire. We know how they were lost. We just can't trace every lineage. And Assyria shattered the northern kingdom as a political entity, but not the Lord's covenant purpose. Judah survived. A remnant returned. And the line of promise continued. That's next time. We'll talk about Babylon, the empire that finished what Assyria started. Thanks for watching. I'll see you then.